Welcome to episode 2 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's Derech HaShem, or the Way of God. And in this episode, we are going to begin the book. In the last episode, we dealt with the author's introduction. And here we are, as we know, this book is split up into 4 sections. We're dealing with this first section, chapter 1, which is called The Creator, which deals with the concept of God. And in this chapter, we are 6 basic principles are laid out by the Ramchal that involve the understanding of God. Just to run through them quickly before we start, they are as follows. Number 1, the fact of his existence. Number 2, his perfection. Number 3, the necessity of his existence. Number 4, his absolute independence. Number 5, his simplicity. And number 6, his unity. We're going to go through these 6 principles in this episode. And let's begin with number 1, which is how we must acknowledge God's existence. So the Ramchal begins, number 1. Every Jew must believe and know that there exists a first being, without beginning or end, who brought all things into existence and continues to sustain them. This being is God. So, if I may make an observation, this rings very much like the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, Yesodei HaTorah, chapter 1, which deals with the fact that every Jew must know that there is God. Also in Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvot, he tells us we are obliged to believe that there is God. And so the Ramchal is bringing both concepts together in this. It's also mentioned in the Hebrew, describes the God as Motzoi Rishon, the primal existence, primal being in existence. This is very much like the Rambam's description of God. And so we're told we must believe and know. Now, that seems superfluous, because if you know, then surely you believe. But I think this is a challenge to each and every Jew. To believe is one thing, to know is another. And I guess you only know when the proof is undeniable. And how can the proof of God be undeniable? If you actually understand that God is not separate from you. God is within and around you and everything that exists in this universe. How is it achieved that you feel God is, as we shall see, this kind of perfection of your moral character and various other disciplines that will bring you closer to God, as every natural human being is naturally drawn towards God. Once you rectify your character and you create a similarity between you and the characteristics of God, his midot, you naturally draw closer to God. And our challenge is to draw close enough that we really feel the presence of God. And once you feel the presence of God in your soul, there is no denying it. It now goes from belief to knowledge. And this, I believe, is the challenge that faces every human being and every Jew, is to bring ourselves to a position where we are within God's light and we feel it without any misconception whatsoever. We feel the presence of God and we know that there is God. Now let's move on to principle 2, how the true nature of God is unfathomable and how these insights are known to us. Number 2, it is further necessary to know that God's true nature cannot be understood at all by any being other than himself. The only thing that we know about him is that he is perfect in every possible way and devoid of every conceivable deficiency. These things are known by tradition, from the patriarchs and prophets. With the revelation at Sinai, all Israel perceived them and gained a clear grasp of their true nature. They then taught them to their children, generation after generation, until this very day. Moshe has thus commanded them, and it is quoted from Deuteronomy 4 verse 9, "You shall not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children." So here the Ramchal is bringing the concept of mitzvah, or transmission. So that was very clear with the Bnei Israel at Mount Sinai. It was unforgettable. Now the Ramchal is going to talk about how a human being can also discern these truths about God from nature around us. So the Ramchal continues. These concepts can also be logically verified by demonstrable proofs. Their veracity can be demonstrated from what we observe in nature and its phenomena, through such scientific disciplines as physics and astronomy. Certain basic principles can be derived, and on the basis of these, clear evidence for these concepts deduced. We will not occupy ourselves with this, however, but will rather set forth the well-known basic principles handed down by tradition. These we will present in an authentic framework, arranged in comprehensive manner. So the Ramchal is urging us, as did Rambam in Yesodei HaTorah, to spend time and gain a basic rudimentary knowledge of physics, astronomy and science, to see the handwriting of God throughout the universe, from the smallest thing, the smallest seashell, where we notice the Fibonacci spiral, or the geometry that God created the world with, or molded the world with. It seems to be octaves that pass from the smallest creature up to the spiral arms of galaxies. They all follow the same ratio, the divine ratio, Fibonacci spirals. And this is fascinating, that the whole diverse universe and planet around us, everything is underwritten by the same principle. And we are urged to notice this, spend time to understand this concept, and you will see a wonderful thread throughout reality around you. And this can be a proof that this is the handwriting of God. And this is what the Ramchal is telling us, urging us to do. Let's move on to principle 3. It is also necessary to know that God's existence is imperative. It is absolutely impossible that he should cease to exist. Principle 4. It is furthermore necessary to know that God's existence does not depend on anything else at all. His existence is intrinsically imperative. Principle 5, which deals with the concept that God is the one simplicity and the unique unity. Number 5, the Ramchal continues. It is likewise necessary to know that God is absolutely simple, having no parts to him. At the same time, all types of perfection are present in him, contained in his being, without being separate parts of it. We can try to understand this by observing that the human mind has many different faculties, each with its own area of activity. Thus, for example, memory is one domain, desire another, and imagination still another. And none of these faculties impinge on the other. Memory, for example, has its own domain, as does desire, and desire does not penetrate the domain of memory, nor does memory enter that of desire. The same is true of all the mind's faculties. The human mind can therefore be said to have structure and is not simple. God, however, does not require a separate domain for each of these powers. In fact, he does possess these powers which, in man, are different from one another. For God, we can say, does desire, and is wise and capable, and is perfect in every conceivable way. On the other hand, God is actually one. these phenomena being present in him, without being separate parts of him. They're being included in him by virtue of his perfection. All types of perfection exist in God, not as phenomena which are separate from his absolute oneness, and it is impossible that God not possess every perfection. Admittedly, this is something far beyond the grasp of our understanding and imagination, and there hardly exists a way to express it and put it into words. Our intellect and imagination are only capable of grasping things bound by the natural limitations created by God, since these are the only things that our senses can detect and convey to our minds. We are incapable of conceiving these different qualities as a single, simple essence, since, amongst created things, they are different, separate concepts. We began our discussion, however, by acknowledging that God's true nature is beyond comprehension. No inference can be drawn to the Creator from what we see amongst created things. The nature and essence of the two are not the same at all, and it is therefore impossible to draw any parallel between them. This, however, is also amongst the things that we know from the tradition discussed earlier. It can also be verified from the laws and principles of nature that it is impossible that some being not exist, unbound by the laws and limitations of nature. It must be impossible that this being cease to exist or have any deficiency. This being must furthermore be divorced from all addition, structure, relationship, comparison, or any other quality that exists in created things. Finally, this being must be the true cause of everything that exists and happens. Unless all this is true, the existence and continuance of things as we know them would be utterly impossible. So the Ramchal is trying to describe the abstract nature of God and how it is actually difficult, even though he's laying it out in black and white words, how the concept of God is not possible really to be imagined or understood. He's giving just kind of chapter headings of descriptions. Why is this? Because nothing exists like God. Therefore, how can you describe something? How can we even formulate some sort of imagination regarding God? How can we can't compartmentalize him in any way, because he exceeds everything. He cannot be compartmentalized. You can try to gain some sort of understanding of the abstract nature of God by just imagining yourself in the universe, how God, at every second of the day and throughout every minute of your life, has been watching you intensely with 100% pure concentration for what you are doing, your actions, your deeds and misdeeds, and has been with you since you were a little baby up to whatever age you are now, man or woman, exactly the same thing. But he also does it to everybody else that exists. He looks at them 100% of their lives. And not only that, he deals with all of the nature of not our planet, but the universe. He determines the swirling of galaxies at the same time as he is watching you. So this concept of being all-powerful, that can be a small sliver of a window into how you can perceive God's magnificence. And it's hard to imagine something can give attention 100% to something whilst giving someone else or something else 100% attention. But that is God, and that is what Ramchal is trying to state, that it's, even though we are trying to put down on paper to describe a principle of God, it's almost impossible. It is impossible to describe it. That's what we know, it's impossible. But this is an inkling of how we must consider that God is a force, an all-pervading force, rather than any individual or any white-bearded flowing figure. He's a force in the universe and outside the universe, because he exists. He is existence. Let's move on to the last principle of this chapter, which is principle 6. His unity and uniqueness are imperative. So the Ramchal continues. Among the things that is also necessary to know is that God must be absolutely one. It is impossible that there exists more than one being whose existence is intrinsically imperative. Only one being can possibly exist with this necessarily perfect essence, and therefore the only reason all other things have the possibility of existence is that God wills them to exist. All other things therefore depend on him and do not have intrinsic existence. We therefore see that there are 6 basic principles involved in our understanding of God, and they are the fact of his existence, his perfection, the necessity of his existence, his absolute independence, his simplicity, and his unity. So that completes the first chapter of the first section of this, the fundamentals section of our book, Derech HaShem. And I think we're going to leave it there for this episode. But I hope the listener is not overwhelmed with these very lofty analysis of God's. But this is necessary, that we must identify and accept these facts. And in the next episode, we're going to move on to chapter 2 and deal with the purpose of creation.